In Part 2, I venture further into speculative territory by outlining hypothetical evolutionary timelines for various potential cryptoterrestrial species. I explore models suggesting that a dinosaur species may have retreated underground and evolved into an intelligent form, alongside others involving different hominin species taking a similar subterranean path. The goal is to examine whether these potential NHIs could collectively account for all aspects of the UAP phenomenon. As occasionally mentioned throughout part 1 of this episode, there's an important distinction between a breakaway civilization and a parallel one. A breakaway civilization, for example, would refer to an unknown human society that may have thrived prior to the alleged Younger Dryas impact event, around 12,000 years ago, and was possibly wiped out by it. The focus here, however, is on highly speculative timelines for various coexisting parallel civilizations, specifically cryptoterrestrial or ultraterrestrial ones that either evolved independently long before the emergence of primates or branched off from early hominids at some point in our evolutionary history. Put simply, any reference to a breakaway civilization will involve a separate human lineage, while a parallel civilization will refer to a hidden cryptoterrestrial species, whether or not it's related to hominins. While it's conceivable that a breakaway human civilization could be behind some UAP sightings, they likely account for only a minority of the evidence, given that most eyewitness testimony involves non-human, alien-looking entities rather than human ones. Before going any further, I want to be clear. I am not suggesting these timelines represent actual, specific branches of our evolutionary tree, or that of any known species. They're purely speculative thought experiments, examples of what could have happened under the right circumstances, given enough time. The goal is to offer plausible cryptoterrestrial scenarios that might help explain the global UAP phenomenon. After all, Earth's history spans billions of years, more than enough time for any number of intelligent lineages to have emerged, evolved, and possibly gone underground. This isn't an attempt to verify that any of these scenarios did happen, because there's no hard evidence to support them. Instead, it's an exploration of what might have occurred, especially in light of the consistent eyewitness reports we've seen over thousands of years. These timelines are speculative models built on the premise that non-human intelligences are here, and that if they aren't extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or extratempestural in origin, then some version of these evolutionary paths might be true. This possibly deserves serious consideration for several reasons, some of which were covered in Part 1 and will be expanded on here in Part 2. The most compelling among them is the fact that reported NHIs often bear an uncanny resemblance to the humanoid form. To examine what that could mean, and to search for potential answers, we have to treat the ultraterrestrial and cryptoterrestrial hypotheses as legitimate alternatives, fully deserving of a place alongside the more mainstream origin theories. I'm going to begin by addressing what feels like a natural evolutionary gap, one that should exist if we follow basic evolutionary principles, especially the most fundamental one, survival. We're conditioned to believe that living on the surface is the default state for any hominid species. It's what we know. It's all we've ever had evidence for. But what if, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's actually more advantageous for an intelligent species to live underground rather than on the surface, particularly on Earth-like planets where life has the potential to evolve into intelligence? Any species that branched off from a more advanced evolutionary line and chose to go underground might have had a better shot at long-term survival than those who stayed above. Perhaps this is a recurring pattern for any humanoid-like species across the galaxy. By going underground, they could avoid conflict or extinction at the hands of competing surface species. They might also be shielded from drastic climate shifts, asteroid impacts, or other catastrophic surface events. It's also worth considering that some of these groups may have been inherently non-hostile or non-confrontational by nature. For them, retreating underground may have felt more natural or simply safer. And maybe that's part of why they've left us alone and haven't wiped us off the map. They could be intrinsically peaceful. Of course, that interpretation may not align with all reported encounters or theories about their motives, but here we are, still thriving nonetheless. Once underground, such a species could continue to thrive and evolve, while their surface-dwelling counterparts died off, whether naturally or due to competition from rival species. Those that did manage to survive on the surface may have been repeatedly set back, both socially and developmentally, by disasters or external pressures. Maybe this is simply the result of being in the right place at the right time, filling an evolutionary niche that was wide open to any species already utilizing caves or subterranean environments. If the core aim of evolution is long-term survival without interruption, then it stands to reason that a shielded environment, one protected from outside threats, would naturally invite a species to occupy that space. In a sense, it becomes the path of least resistance for any species that ultimately achieves a kind of collective immortality. At first, such a species might not even recognize that their environment is enabling this outcome. There may be no master plan, no roadmap to achieving uninterrupted progress or survival. But the environmental niche they fill would quietly allow it to happen over time. It's easy to imagine a variety of historical scenarios, changing climates, asteroid strikes, or mass extinctions that might force a species underground. Shallow lava tubes near volcanoes or deep natural caverns could provide immediate refuge from extinction-level events, and those who stay underground might inadvertently choose the most viable path forward. For instance, as noted in Part 1, a species like Homo naledi already demonstrated some capacity for surviving in deep cave systems, based on evidence of their ability to navigate narrow passages and use fire. That alone suggests a latent adaptability that could have allowed them to make the transition, and possibly even thrive beneath the surface. While life underground might seem less appealing or less comfortable than living on the surface, especially at first, it could ultimately result in a higher survival rate for any species that happen to take that path. The initial challenges would be greater, no doubt, but with those challenges might come stronger social cohesion, deeper communal bonds, and the foresight to recognize that remaining underground offers better odds of long-term survival. Such an environment would allow them to develop technology without the interruptions or resets that surface species have had to endure. While civilizations above ground were repeatedly forced to start over, those underground could build steadily, layer upon layer, developing exponentially over time. And if a parallel NHI civilization had a significant head start, they might have discovered forms of physics that we haven't begun to understand. Given hundreds of thousands of years to explore and refine that knowledge, their technology could now be so far advanced beyond ours that it appears indistinguishable from magic, especially when you consider how far our technology has come in just the past 200 years. This also ties directly into the UTH interpretation of the CTH model. Perhaps they unlock some yet-to-be-discovered principles of higher dimensional physics, allowing them to manipulate 3D reality in ways that seem impossible to us. Transmedium travel, anti-gravity propulsion, craft teleportation, these could all be the result of advanced technologies that merely appear magical, because we lack the context to understand them. And we don't need to look far for an example. Our own species illustrates the point. It took humanity thousands of years to finally reach a technological tipping point. Now that we have, our growth is exponential, and we've developed underground bunkers capable of preserving our knowledge and technology, even in the face of catastrophe. Some might argue that sparse population density was the main reason for our slow start. but drastic climate shifts and natural disasters likely played an equally important role, constantly resetting our progress until we finally broke through. Because life on the surface presents so many challenges to the long-term survival of a species, it may have taken us this long to finally reach what I'd call technological escape velocity, that critical point where our population size and technological momentum combine to ensure exponential growth. For surface-dwelling species, this might be an extremely rare achievement, especially for those without infrastructure capable of shielding a significant portion of the population from disaster. Reaching that point could finally allow for extended stability and sustained advancement, but even now, there's no guarantee it will last. The day may come when most of civilization is forced to start over again, whether due to war, climate collapse, or some other global catastrophe. And yet, those few with the resources and foresight to go underground might continue growing, evolving, and preserving knowledge, undisturbed by the chaos on the surface. In that sense, perhaps a small pocket of our own species has already reached technological escape velocity, at least in part, those who could endure underground while the rest reset. And who's to say that hasn't happened before? What if a breakaway human civilization, possibly something like Atlantis, achieved that threshold thousands of years ago? Perhaps they survived underground, continuing to build upon the knowledge and technology they had accumulated before disappearing from the surface world. Or going forward, if an ancient cryptoterrestrial species had already taken that path for their own survival, maybe the Atlanteans were among a select few invited into their hidden realm. A mutually beneficial arrangement, two intelligent species cooperating in isolation. And maybe, just before the Younger Dryas event, they launched lifeboats, Noah's Ark-style craft, designed to salvage a select portion of the human population. Not to save everyone, but to preserve a seed of what we were and what we might become. If a select group of humans today, those with access to greater resources, were able to escape a global war or natural disaster by retreating into underground bunkers, they could potentially advance the human species indefinitely. Unlike our ancestors who failed to reach that critical point of technological escape velocity, these survivors would have had the means to preserve and build upon our current level of knowledge without interruption. This scenario might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. In fact, it's a likely outcome if Earth ever faces an extinction-level event or nuclear holocaust. While shattered remnants of humanity would likely survive on the surface, they would be significantly set back, developmentally, socially, and technologically. In many ways, they'd be forced to start over. Meanwhile, those fortunate enough to be secured in long-term survival bunkers, designed to endure for centuries or more, could continue to thrive, innovate, and evolve. Facilities like the Cheyenne Mountain Complex or other classified bunkers unknown to the public serve as possible examples. Over time, these groups might even grow comfortable or complacent, choosing never to return to the surface at all, unless, of course, genetic stagnation required them to reintroduce fresh DNA. Naturally, those with specialized expertise, physicists, engineers, doctors, not to mention world leaders and the ultra-wealthy, would be among the lucky few. Any advanced technology currently kept from the public, developed through special access programs or black budget projects, would likely be deployed openly in such a scenario, no longer needing secrecy in a world that's already collapsed. This very real and plausible future scenario may have striking similarities to an ancient breakaway human civilization, or even a parallel cryptoterrestrial one, that already made the choice to live underground, leaving us to thrive on the surface under the illusion that we're the only intelligent society on the planet. But such long-term isolation could come with a cost. One likely consequence might be a limited, stagnant gene pool that leads to gradual DNA degradation over time. To avoid this, these underground dwellers may have been forced to combine their DNA with that of primitive surface humans, those slowly recovering from a global catastrophe. That fresh infusion of genetic material might be the key to ensuring their continued survival and evolution. If this sounds like a possible outcome for future humans, then maybe it was also the case for past ones, those who branched off from our evolutionary tree in the distant past and took the subterranean route. Now imagine a future scenario in which surface humanity is once again left to recover and eventually thrive. Thousands of years from now, this new civilization might finally reach a level of advancement that allows them to land on the moon, unknowingly repeating a feat once achieved by their forgotten ancestors. There, they might discover a strange relic, faded red and white stripes, blue fields, and white star-like symbols. With no knowledge of the civilization that placed it there hundreds of thousands of years earlier, they might naturally assume it came from some long-lost extraterrestrial race, never realizing it was their own ancestors, still hidden beneath their feet. Getting back to the present day, the line between any hidden cryptoterrestrial species and modern humans on the surface might naturally begin to blur over time. If both societies exist on the same planet simultaneously, there could be an additional lost species, one that fills a natural evolutionary gap between surface dwellers and subterranean beings. Take cryptids, for example. These could represent the leftovers or forgotten ones, caught somewhere in the middle, between the surface world and whatever lies beneath. Creatures like Bigfoot, Mothman, the Chupacabra, and others often exhibit characteristics that seem like hybrids, sharing traits of surface primates and the more commonly reported subterranean greys. Bigfoot, for instance, appears more biologically aligned with surface primates. It might even share a significant amount of DNA with them, making it better adapted to remain above ground, hiding in remote forests or shallow cave systems. On the other hand, beings like the Nightcrawlers, the Dover Demon, or the Hopkinsville Goblins resemble the typical gray archetype more closely, but they seem cruder, more primitive, and potentially more aggressive. Perhaps these are the rejects of a subterranean species, beings who also dwell underground but not as deep as the more intelligent or less hostile greys often associated with UAP. After all, the greys, if real, would likely possess the technology needed to reach much deeper regions of the planet, far beyond what others could access. In that sense, these cryptids may be stuck somewhere between both worlds, unwelcome in either advanced society, and left to wander the margins. Again, I'm not claiming any of this is true, but if we're trying to present a comprehensive model that accounts for all reported aspects of the phenomenon, it's worth considering. Even if part of this is real, these ideas might help explain why so many witnesses across cultures and time periods report seeing these creatures. At the very least, the consistency in those reports makes the possibility worth entertaining. A primary technological goal of any cryptoterrestrial or ultraterrestrial civilization, especially one attempting to remain hidden, would naturally be the development of advanced camouflage or stealth. If for some reason they've recently felt compelled to make more frequent appearances above ground, maintaining secrecy would still be essential for their survival. Adopting a kind of trickster mentality might be part of that strategy, creating confusion among surface dwellers to obscure their presence. One effective method would be manipulating our consciousness or distorting our visual perception. After all, the ability to hide from a surface-based civilization would likely be embedded into the core of their technological and cultural development. In rare instances where they do want us to take notice, perhaps as a kind of environmental warning that also serves their own interests, like in the aerial school encounter, a trickster element could be used to throw us off the trail regarding their true origin or location. If we're led to believe they're extraterrestrials from another planet, that narrative might serve as a useful decoy. And if they're aware that we've caught on to their presence, that the jig is up, so to speak, then it would make sense for them to actively shape our perception, both physically and mentally, to keep us from connecting the dots. Throughout history, this misdirection might have taken many forms, appearing as gods, angels, or demons in ancient times, as fairies or gnomes in folklore, as aliens in the modern era, and more recently as interdimensional beings or human time travelers. As our understanding of the universe evolves, so too do the stories we tell ourselves about who or what they are. If they've allowed or even encouraged these shifting interpretations, it would only support their goal of remaining hidden. That's the essence of the trickster element, keeping the truth just out of reach by staying one step ahead of our expectations. For now, let's get back to the original argument. Can we really make the case that it would be evolutionarily advantageous for an intelligent species to live in vast underground caverns as opposed to on the surface of a planet? Would this really help them avoid being exposed to potential natural disasters, asteroid impacts, drastic changes in climate, competing resources, and other aggressive hominid species competing for resources or simply being aggressive? Would such a parallel civilization be more likely to evolve and develop technology sooner than a land-dwelling species like Homo sapiens? Most would be forced to agree there is indeed a case to be made that living in vast underground environments could offer significant evolutionary advantages to an intelligent species, possibly even making it more likely that such a species might develop advanced technology well before surface-dwelling humans did. While we often think of intelligence arising on the open plains or in forested areas, there are strong arguments that underground life could provide a better long-term survival strategy, especially for a species trying to avoid extinction-level threats or interspecies competition. To start, an underground domain would offer exceptional protection from catastrophic events that frequently reset life on the surface. Asteroid impacts like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs would have had far less effect on deeply buried ecosystems. The same goes for supervolcano eruptions, gamma ray bursts, solar flares, and even abrupt climate collapses, all of which have disrupted surface life multiple times. Underground, a species could ride out such disasters in relative safety, their existence buffered by miles of rock and stable temperatures. This leads into the second major advantage, environmental stability. Subterranean ecosystems typically maintain consistent temperature, humidity, and atmospheric conditions. Without seasonal extremes or frequent natural disasters, a species has time to develop complex behaviors, long-term planning, and stable social structures. In other words, they'd have fewer survival-based distractions to evolve intelligence and culture over hundreds of thousands of years. Resources underground may seem limited at first glance, but in reality, such environments offer access to concentrated minerals, geothermal energy, subterranean water systems, and symbiotic life forms like fungi and chemosynthetic bacteria. A species with a knack for technological development might discover early how to harness geothermal heat, extract minerals, and develop closed-loop ecosystems. That kind of early mastery of energy and chemistry could put them far ahead of surface-dwelling humans, who took millennia just to move from fire to electricity. Another factor is that living underground would naturally isolate a species from other aggressive hominins. While Homo sapiens and their cousins were fighting for dominance on the surface, often through war, genocide, and conquest, a subterranean species could avoid these cycles of violence entirely. Isolation isn't just about safety, it also allows for undisturbed innovation. Without being wiped out by competing species, they could have advanced uninterrupted for millennia. Now, would such an environment accelerate technological evolution? In many key areas, I would argue that should be obvious. Underground life would likely drive early development of energy technologies, especially geothermal, architectural mastery for dealing with rock pressure, ventilation, and temperature control, and even resonance-based tools and communication. Material sciences would advance quickly due to constant access to raw materials. Optical technology might develop differently, perhaps sooner, due to the need to navigate or manipulate light in darkness. Communication, too, could take unique forms like tactile signals, vibrations, or low-frequency sound waves. This opens the door to entirely different branches of technology: quiet, efficient, biologically integrated systems that wouldn't leave obvious traces on the surface. Physically, such a species might look quite different from us. In the absence of sunlight, they might evolve pallid or depigmented skin, larger or differently structured eyes, and enhanced non-visual senses like echolocation, electrical sensitivity, or vibrational awareness. A slender, energy-efficient physique would be advantageous in confined tunnels. Socially, these beings would likely be highly cooperative, since surviving in tight, interdependent environments demands it. Their intelligence may not be driven by dominance, but by empathy, memory, planning, and subtlety. Finally, their decision to remain hidden could make perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective. If they developed early intelligence, mastered energy, and became aware of us before we were aware of ourselves, they might have judged surface-dwelling humans to be unpredictable and dangerous. Their withdrawal might not be weakness, but strategy. They wouldn't need to compete with us. Instead, they could observe, influence us indirectly, or simply stay out of sight. In summary, the case for an intelligent, technologically advanced subterranean species is more than just imaginative speculation. It rests on solid evolutionary logic. Underground life offers stability, safety, access to resources, and a developmental environment where intelligence and technology could flourish away from the violence and chaos of the surface. Such a species could be older, more advanced, and more elusive than anything we've encountered right beneath our feet. The Silurian Hypothesis. In the quest to determine which species may have evolved to intelligence prior to Homo sapiens and thrived in an underground environment that might account for today's UAP sightings and NHI interactions, let's start with the first possible scenario, the Silurian Hypothesis. The idea that a species of dinosaur could have evolved into an intelligent, technologically advanced, and perhaps even subterranean civilization aligns closely with what is now known as the Silurian Hypothesis, a speculative thought experiment proposing that if a prior technological civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, it might have vanished without leaving any discernible trace in the geological record. Scientists Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt half-jokingly coined the term. This hypothesis found an early conceptual parallel in the work of paleontologist Dale Russell, who in the 1980s proposed a model of what a dinosaur might have evolved into if it had developed human-like intelligence. His candidate was Stenonychosaurus inequalis, a small, highly encephalized theropod dinosaur now often grouped within the broader category of troodontids. Russell's dinosauroid was envisioned as an upright, bipedal, large-brained being with forward-facing eyes, three-fingered hands capable of manipulating tools, and a posture not dissimilar to Homo sapiens. While critics noted that his depiction bore a resemblance to humans due to anthropomorphic bias, the biological starting point of Stenonychosaurus is nonetheless significant. It possessed one of the highest known encephalization quotients, EQs, among non-avian dinosaurs, suggesting a latent capacity for greater cognitive evolution. If we can imagine a timeline where Stenonychosaurus survived the Cretaceous Paleogene KPG extinction event 66 million years ago, or even flourished in the few million years prior, we can construct a speculative evolutionary arc toward intelligence and civilization. Given that mammals took roughly 60 million years from the Paleocene to evolve into modern humans, a similar or potentially shorter span could plausibly suffice for Stenonychosaurus if certain pressures selected for intelligence. Their small size, presumed agility, binocular vision, and high EQ would give them a leg up in adaptive versatility. Over tens of millions of years, we can speculate that they might gradually transition to a more upright gait, freeing their forelimbs for increasingly complex manipulative functions. Digit evolution could proceed toward fine motor control. Their vision would remain acute, possibly growing more attuned to both daylight and low-light environments. Vocalization could eventually develop into language-like communication systems, especially in a social species. Now, assume that a major global event, such as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, approximately 56 million years ago, or the aforementioned KPG boundary event, imposed intense ecological pressure. Some segments of the proto-intelligent population might have retreated underground, using cave systems or ancient lava tubes for shelter, especially if surface life became hazardous. The presence of such tubes beneath ancient volcanic zones and even polar regions like Antarctica could provide relatively stable environments, shielded from surface catastrophes, climate swings, and predators. Over time, this subterranean adaptation could exert significant evolutionary pressure. Eyes might become larger or more sensitive to infrared or low-light spectra. Skin pigmentation could fade, resulting in pale or grayish tones. Limbs may elongate, and digits become even more precise for tactile manipulation in darkness. Olfactory senses might weaken, while other sensory modalities, possibly even electromagnetic or electroreceptive perception, could heighten. Given these pressures, the beings evolving underground could, across tens of millions of years, come to resemble the archetypal gray alien, hairless, with large dark eyes, thin limbs, pale skin, and a pronounced cranium. These features would not be convergent with humans so much as logical responses to underground and technological adaptation. Eventually, such a species could master aerospace technologies, not merely jets or rockets, but craft that manipulate inertial mass, gravity waves, or even space-time itself. The frequent eyewitness reports of UAP executing right-angled turns, hovering silently, and vanishing instantaneously might suggest propulsion systems not reliant on chemical combustion, but on field effects, consistent with a civilization millions of years ahead of us. During their technological ascent, they might have constructed massive subterranean cities, harnessing geothermal energy, underground rivers, and advanced recycling systems. The moon, with its lack of atmospheric erosion and its cave-like lava tubes, would be an obvious next target, ideal for bases shielded from radiation and meteor impacts. Over millions of years, structures might be constructed on or beneath the lunar surface, concealed from satellite imaging or built in eras long predating humanity's ability to notice. Similar efforts might be undertaken on Mars, where evidence of ancient lava tubes and subglacial aquifers could attract settlements or serve as outposts. Thus, a plausible evolutionary trajectory emerges, beginning with Stenonychosaurus in the late Cretaceous, evolving through tens of millions of years into intelligent beings. Once technologically capable, a small faction of this population may have decided to occupy the moon, eventually resulting in two phenotypic branches, one shorter in stature from remaining in an underground environment with more gravity, and another more akin to the tall, wiry type with elongated features, somewhat similar to a praying mantis, from continuing to evolve in an environment with less gravity. Culturally and technologically, such beings might abandon or radically alter the physical manifestation of civilization as we understand it. If their scientific understanding reached the point of manipulating matter through directed fields, quantum coherence, or even consciousness-mediated technologies, the traces of their existence might be nearly impossible to detect without knowing exactly what to look for. Their tools might be non-metallic, their cities built of energy rather than stone, and their data stored in biological substrates or resonant fields. The absence of archaeological evidence in such a scenario becomes less a disproof and more a feature of their extreme advancement and adaptability. From this speculative vantage point, the Silurian hypothesis doesn't merely propose an ancient civilization lost to time. It suggests an intelligent species that may still exist, not extinct, but hidden in the deep biosphere and perhaps occasionally manifesting as the phenomenon we now refer to as UAP. Their long evolutionary journey from a bright-eyed predator of the late Cretaceous to a subterranean intelligence manipulating gravitational fields and exploring the stars represents one of the most profound hypothetical narratives that could unite paleontology, evolutionary biology, and the enduring mystery of non-human intelligences reported across human history. At this point, you might be wondering, is it at all possible some non-avian dinosaurs could have survived the KPG and continued to evolve on the surface? Or would it be more likely that some of the more intelligent dinosaur species, such as the Stenonychosaurus, would have needed to already have some presence underground before the impact event, perhaps an offshoot that were in the early stages of evolving toward a humanoid form? Is the 10 million years between the emergence of Stenonychosaurus and the KPG enough time to evolve to the point where they would even be capable of surviving in caverns deep enough to escape the aftermath of the KPG? The KPG event, triggered by the Chicxulub asteroid 66 million years ago, led to massive environmental collapse. Global wildfires, months to years of darkness from soot and aerosols, a drastic drop in photosynthesis, and a collapse of food chains, especially those dependent on surface vegetation. This extinction was especially harsh on large-bodied animals and obligate carnivores, but not all ecosystems were equally affected. Deep-sea environments, burrowing niches, and possibly subterranean or cave-adapted organisms would have been partially shielded from the most immediate effects. We know that small mammals, turtles, crocodilians, and some birds survived, likely due to a combination of small size, generalist diets, burrowing or aquatic habits, and perhaps the ability to enter torpor or hibernation-like states. While no confirmed non-avian dinosaur fossils are known from after the KPG boundary, the fossil record is incomplete, and survival in isolated refugia cannot be ruled out categorically. If a species of small, intelligent dinosaur-like Stenonychosaurus had begun exploiting caves, crevices, or lava tubes, it's possible that a small population could have survived in these insulated microenvironments. Such survival would likely hinge on omnivory, tolerance to low light or no light conditions, and a flexible social structure, traits that would make an ideal candidate for later intelligent evolution. Stenonychosaurus inequalis lived from roughly 76 to 66 million years ago, meaning around 10 million years elapsed between its emergence and the asteroid impact. In evolutionary terms, this is plenty of time for meaningful change, especially under strong selective pressures. For comparison, mammals evolved from small shrew-like forms at the end of the Cretaceous to early primates within 10 to 15 million years. The brain size of early hominins doubled in about 2 million years and tripled in less than 4. The encephalization quotient of Stenonychosaurus was already high, estimated around 5.8, compared to 2 or 3 for modern birds and 7 to 8 for humans. This means the cognitive foundation was already above that of many modern animals. So if even a small subgroup began adapting to complex social behavior, problem-solving, or proto-tool use, especially in response to predation or ecological stress, that 10 million year window could have launched them down an accelerating evolutionary pathway. It would be speculative, but plausible, that such a lineage could have developed basic cavern-dwelling adaptations, such as improved night vision, social cohesion, and basic spatial mapping, precursors to more advanced traits if they survive the extinction bottleneck. Any species already partially adapted to subterranean environments before the KPG event would be at a strong advantage. Deep cave systems and lava tubes, especially those located in volcanically active or geothermally warm regions like ancient equivalents of modern Iceland, Hawaii, or even Antarctica, would have been buffered from the worst surface effects: global firestorms, UV radiation spikes, and long-term cold and darkness. If a subset of Stenonychosaurus had already been using underground nests, hunting in cave twilight zones, or retreating into lava tubes to escape predators or heat, it could have formed the progenitor population of a subterranean lineage. Evolution would then strongly favor traits such as enhanced spatial memory, tactile communication, dark adapted eyes or echolocation, reduction of pigment or feathers, and communal behavior for warmth and survival. In such environments, humanoid traits such as upright posture for navigating tight tunnels, dexterous hands for manipulating the environment, and forward-facing eyes for depth perception could indeed be selected through convergent evolution. The idea that intelligent life converges on a humanoid body plan is debated, but has credible advocates, including Simon Conway Morris, who argues that evolutionary pathways are constrained by physics, biomechanics, and environmental pressures. On Earth-like planets, or even in Earth-like niches such as caves, intelligent organisms might need to manipulate their environment, favoring grasping appendages, be mobile, favoring bilateral symmetry, require high-fidelity sensory input, favoring stereo vision and localized sensory organs, or develop technology, favoring freed forelimbs and fine motor control. In this view, the humanoid form is not necessarily anthropomorphic, but an optimal solution to certain evolutionary challenges. It's entirely possible that, had a species like Stenonychosaurus survived and remained on an evolutionary track toward intelligence, the result would be strikingly similar to us, or the archetypal greys reported in folklore and abduction narratives. Now let's imagine a speculative trajectory arc for how the Stenonychosaurus might have evolved in this scenario. Around 76 million years ago, Stenonychosaurus emerges, already showing high EQ and binocular vision. At between 70 and 66 million years ago, a subgroup begins using caves or volcanic tunnels, perhaps to escape predators or extreme climate shifts. At roughly 66 million years ago, the KPG event devastates surface ecosystems. The cave-adapted subgroup survives due to insulation from surface collapse. This lineage begins rapidly evolving in underground refugia around 65 to 50 million years ago, diverging from surface ancestors. They become specialized for darkness, low-energy ecosystems, and social learning. Moving on to 50 to 10 million years ago, a highly intelligent, possibly humanoid form emerges, perhaps creating rudimentary tools, mapping cave networks, and developing a proto-civilization deep underground. At 10 million years to present, this civilization flourishes unseen, developing advanced technologies, perhaps utilizing geothermal energy, electromagnetic propulsion, and exotic materials not commonly used in surface life. Here at the modern era of our civilization, some of their craft occasionally emerge, witnessed as UAP. Their physiology, long adapted to subterranean life, resembles what witnesses describe as the Greys. While there is no direct evidence for the survival of non-avian dinosaurs past the KPG boundary, and this remains a fringe hypothesis, the circumstantial and biological plausibility of such a scenario, especially in relation to Stenonychosaurus, is not scientifically impossible. Given what we know about evolutionary pressures, ecological niches, and convergent design, a speculative lineage of intelligent, humanoid, and potentially subterranean descendants of small theropod dinosaurs is a scenario worthy of further thought, especially in light of the continuing enigma of UAP phenomena and their often non-conforming biological characteristics. As far as potential evidence in support of the Silurian hypothesis, we might want to consider taking a closer look at the tridactyl Nazca remains first discovered as early as 2015. I briefly mentioned the evidence in support of some of them being potentially authentic specimens in Part 1, at the very least ancient reconstructions of something possibly witnessed by our ancestors around 1,000 years ago. The so-called Nazca mummies were allegedly discovered near the Nazca region of southern Peru, close to the famed Nazca lines. The discovery was made by a group of treasure hunters and later presented by Gaia.com, a media company focused on alternative history and consciousness topics. The bodies were said to be found in a tomb and exhibited several anomalous features, most notably elongated skulls, 3 long fingers and toes, and a whitish, desiccated appearance. Radiocarbon dating reportedly placed some of the remains at around 1,000 years old, aligning them with pre-Columbian times. Mexican journalist and UFO researcher Jaime Maussan helped bring the mummies into the international spotlight starting in 2017. He promoted them as potentially non-human or extraterrestrial beings during multiple press conferences, documentaries, and appearances, particularly through collaborations with Gaia and other alternative platforms. In 2023, Maussan made global headlines again when he presented 2 of the mummified specimens before Mexico's Congress, claiming they were of non-human origin. This controversial event reignited widespread media attention and scientific criticism, with multiple experts denouncing the mummies as possible composites or altered ancient remains. Why then would the experts currently working on them claim they appear to be authentic specimens? Hard to believe they would put their credibility on the line over something that, to them, should be obvious fabrications if that is indeed the case. Nevertheless, the debate over their authenticity and implications remains ongoing. If we assume for the sake of discussion that at least some of the Nazca mummies, particularly the tridactyl humanoids with long limbs, large crania, and metal implants, are authentic biological specimens, rather than hoaxes or misidentified remains, then they could represent a potentially rare physical manifestation of a relic species descended from an intelligent non-human lineage. The troodontid connection is not unreasonable in this context. Troodontids were also 3-fingered, bipedal, and likely grasped objects with precision. Their evolutionary trajectory, given millions of years in a subterranean environment, could result in beings with long, thin digits adapted for fine motor control in tight spaces or for interfacing with delicate technology. The tridactyl configuration of the Nazca mummies, especially those like Maria, might be a long-retained trait from their ancestral theropod morphology, streamlined by convergent evolution for technical manipulation in a gravity-bound compact environment. The resemblance to the gray alien archetype, large head, slit-like mouth, no visible ears, elongated limbs, and smooth skin, is particularly striking in some of these mummies. If we view this morphology through the lens of long-term subterranean or low-light adaptation, as posited in the Silurian-derived narrative, these features would be functionally advantageous. Large eyes for vision in darkness, reduced pigmentation, minimalistic external ear structures, and slender builds to conserve energy and maximize agility in tight spaces. The presence of eggs inside some mummies suggests oviparity or retained ovoviviparity, which would be consistent with their reptilian ancestry, although evolution might produce deviations. The anatomical positioning of the eggs is also worth noting. It could indicate communal or gestational strategies that differ from modern reptiles or mammals, perhaps tied to an egg incubation infrastructure within their culture. Osmium is one of the densest and rarest elements on Earth, and its presence in metallic implants in the hands and chests of these mummies, if verified, should not be dismissed. Its rarity implies purposeful application, not incidental contamination. If the hands are the primary interface with a craft's control system, then electromagnetic resonance, motion-responsive feedback, or even bioelectric field synchronization could be involved by using such implants as some kind of wireless control mechanism. Osmium's high conductivity and resistance to corrosion might make it ideal for stable signal transduction, acting as a neural relay or amplifier. This might allow the pilot to intuitively guide the craft, much like how a person can manipulate a computer cursor with their thoughts in experimental brain-computer interfaces today. The fluttering or erratic hovering motion reported in craft could be the visible byproduct of subtle hand movements or momentary lapses in steady neuromuscular control, especially in a low-gravity or field-induced environment. This would also align with reports by those who have claimed to be inside these type of craft, such as Bob Lazar, who indicated there were no obvious control systems, only a panel or console that reacted in a way similar to touch or proximity. He did not understand how it worked, but suggested it might involve hand placement or bioelectric interaction. That would make sense if they are only able to be controlled by a pilot with such objects implanted within their hands. Nobody else would be able to fly it, so they would be the ideal type of security system. As a side note, that would make these objects highly sought after by any scientists attempting to pilot or re-engineer such craft. They would also eliminate the hypothesis that a mental connection of some sort would be required, unless of course that is the main reason they were implanted inside the hands. It might suggest that both dynamics are required, hand movement and mental control. The chest implants are more enigmatic, but a few speculative options emerge. Bioregulatory implants. These might serve as stabilization or filtration systems, compensating for high CO2 environments or gravitational shifts between underground and above ground conditions. Similar to an artificial heart or pacemaker, they could manage internal homeostasis, distributed nanotech-enhanced hormones, or regulate electromagnetic field interactions necessary for either life support or consciousness modulation. 2. A communicative and/or storage node. Positioned near the heart and lungs, the chest region may act as a central relay for intraspecies communication or data storage, possibly tied to a hive network or group consciousness. In this case, the osmium alloy might serve as a durable carrier for encoded information, perhaps even quantum resonant memory systems, preserving identity or collective memories across vast timescales. And 3. A field modulation device. Another possibility is that these devices interact with localized electromagnetic fields. Their placement near the thorax, where major blood vessels and organs converge, could allow them to modulate the electromagnetic signature of the individual, which may be vital for cloaking, healing, or even interdimensional travel via harmonic resonance, a fringe but often discussed aspect in contactee and whistleblower lore. If the Nazca beings were once surface-exploring members of a deeper subterranean civilization, perhaps exploratory scouts or biological avatars designed to withstand surface conditions, then their discovery in Peru may be the accidental unearthing of a failed or abandoned expedition. The Nazca region, rich in geoglyphs and tunnels, could have served as a base or interface point with early humans, or even as an energy node in a larger global grid. Alternatively, the mummies may be funerary remains of deceased members who were left behind during a surface excursion. Local inhabitants could have stumbled upon such remains or been privy to them and, in awe or reverence, decided to preserve the bodies with diatomaceous earth. If the mummies are authentic, they may not just represent a relic species, but one node in a broader cryptoterrestrial network, descendants of a Troodon-like lineage that survived mass extinction, went underground, evolved to intelligence, and occasionally reemerges. These Nazca remains might be glimpses of a hidden evolutionary success story that spans tens of millions of years and now sits at the margins of human perception, just out of reach, yet never entirely gone. Insectoids. It's an intriguing idea to consider that a large insectoid species could have evolved into intelligent, upright beings, especially if we imagine a cryptoterrestrial civilization developing long before primates emerged. While it might sound like science fiction, there are some compelling scientific and evolutionary factors that make it at least biologically possible, though highly speculative. Let's start with Earth's ancient past. During the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago, oxygen levels were much higher than they are today, reaching around 35%. This allowed arthropods like giant dragonflies, Meganeura, and massive millipedes, Anthropleura, to grow to astonishing sizes. Under such conditions, it's feasible to imagine that a lineage of insects could have begun evolving toward greater complexity. For an intelligent species to emerge from insects, however, they'd need major innovations. A more efficient respiratory system than the passive tracheal network used by modern insects, perhaps even evolving a closed circulatory system similar to vertebrates. These would be prerequisites for developing a large brain, which requires high oxygen and energy demands. Social insects like ants, termites, and bees already show early signs of collective intelligence. They use complex communication systems, farm fungi, and build elaborate underground cities. If such eusociality were pushed far enough over millions of years, perhaps due to isolation or environmental pressures, it could give rise to specialized castes with enlarged brains and individual learning capacity. That would be a major leap, since most insect intelligence is hardwired rather than learned. It would take a long evolutionary path, much longer than a dinosaur species, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility. Now, in terms of physical structure, some insects already show postures that hint at upright locomotion. Praying mantises, for instance, stand erect while using their raptorial arms. With modifications to their jointed limbs and exoskeletons, a humanoid or bipedal posture could evolve, particularly if tool use became a selective advantage. That said, insects face real limitations due to their exoskeletons, especially in terms of growth and molting. A large-bodied, intelligent insect would need either an extremely lightweight, strong exoskeleton or some form of internal support to manage its weight. Living underground might also play a key role in this evolutionary path. A subterranean environment provides protection from predators, climate shifts, asteroid impacts, and even surface-dwelling competitors. Evolution in such a hidden biosphere could reinforce stealth, vibration sensing, and group coordination, traits that lend themselves well to intelligence and survival. So while it's certainly speculative, the notion of a sapient insect-like species evolving long before primates and remaining hidden in deep underground ecosystems is not entirely outside scientific possibility. Given the right conditions, high oxygen, isolation, time, and evolutionary pressure, an intelligent insectoid race might have emerged, evolved tools, and even developed technology in ways that would be difficult for us to detect. That said, this idea is even more speculative than the notion of a dinosaur or hominin species evolving to intelligence. It's far more likely that some reported insectoids are simply misidentified greys, especially given their overlapping physical traits. For example, certain greys are described as having more angular, mantis-like features, taller, more slender, and with elongated limbs, leading some to interpret them as insect-like. If a particular cryptoterrestrial species evolved in isolation or diverged from its close relatives at some point in the past and later thrived in space or low-gravity environments, their appearance might naturally shift in a way that seems insectoid to us. Alternatively, since the facial structure of the typical gray already shares a resemblance to ants, mantises, or other insects, these descriptions may simply reflect misinterpretation shaped by human perception and psychological state. This isn't without precedent. Many experiencers or abductees have reported seeing large owls during an encounter, only to later realize that a 4-foot owl with abnormally large eyes might be more fantastical than a non-human intelligence. These kinds of mismatches could stem from several factors: the inherent high strangeness of such encounters, altered states of consciousness, or even deliberate obfuscation. In other words, the owl might be a screen memory or induced hallucination, the result of a dreamlike or dissociative state intentionally triggered by the NHI. Whether this is achieved through some specialized drug, hypnotic suggestion, or form of telepathy, the goal might be to confuse witnesses about their appearance, intentions, or origins. Ultimately, it's more plausible that we're dealing with a single species, or perhaps a small handful of related ones that followed slightly different evolutionary paths. That's especially true if they're based on dinosaurian or hominin ancestry. By contrast, an insect species evolving into an intelligent humanoid form would likely be rare, if not improbable, on any planet. Of course, the one major exception to this might be the interdimensional hypothesis, which allows for almost any conceivable form of intelligence. In that scenario, conventional evolutionary limits might not apply at all. Potential hominin timelines. In this portion of the episode, I'll be presenting 3 different hypothetical evolutionary timeline narratives that could have diverged from the Homo genus, starting with one of the oldest hominin species that could have broken from their evolutionary line, then to a mid-range species, and finally to a more recent one. Possibility number 1, earliest diversion timeline. Around 2 million years ago, during the Lower Pleistocene, a small, unassuming population of Homo habilis, or perhaps early Homo erectus, found itself cut off from the broader hominid world. Whether due to tectonic activity, glacial encroachment, or migration into a unique ecological niche, this group ended up isolated in a region that offered both safety and opportunity. It's possible they wandered into a vast interconnected cave system, perhaps in a mountainous or geothermally active region where external predators were few but environmental challenges were formidable. Over the millennia, this population adapted slowly and steadily. Evolution, unconstrained by surface-level survival pressures, began to shape them differently. While surface hominins competed for territory, mates, and food in the open savannas, this isolated group was sheltered from such dynamics. Their environment required foresight, cooperation, and an intimate understanding of enclosed space and subtle changes in temperature, airflow, or seismic vibration. Natural selection favored intelligence, empathy, and awareness over brute strength. As time passed, their brains grew, not necessarily in absolute size, but in efficiency and specialization. Their senses adapted to low light or no light conditions, leading to a reliance on enhanced hearing, proprioception, and perhaps even electroreception, biological radar, if you will. Language may have taken a different path, favoring tonal or vibrational cues over vocal articulation. By 500,000 BCE, they had likely reached a stage of cultural and technological sophistication comparable to or surpassing early Homo sapiens. But their technology was not about domination of nature, it was about harmonizing with it. They explored geothermal energy, resonant acoustics, and perhaps even biologically integrated materials. They may have developed tools that left no trace on the surface because they never needed to surface. By 100,000 BCE, they could plausibly have extended their influence beyond the Earth's crust. Aided by millions of years of uninterrupted development and free from the cycles of war and collapse that plague surface civilizations, they might have reached Earth's orbit or even the moon, constructing satellites or inhabiting enigmatic lunar structures that now perplex modern analysts. When Homo sapiens finally began spreading across the planet, these subterranean beings likely observed them with fascination and perhaps caution. At some point, they may have interacted, subtly or symbolically, influencing early human mythologies about gods, sky beings, or watchers. As humans expanded, the cryptoterrestrials withdrew even further, becoming silent observers, leaving only fleeting traces, strange lights in the sky, inexplicable aerial phenomena, and encounters at the edges of perception. Possibility number 2, mid-range divergence timeline. Roughly 800,000 years ago, a divergence occurred not in the form of a mutation, but through isolation and ecological adaptation. A group of Homo heidelbergensis, or potentially Homo antecessor, found itself separated from the broader migratory patterns of early hominins. The specifics of their isolation are speculative, but could involve tectonic shifts, glacial cycles, or voluntary seclusion into mountainous or subterranean regions. Unlike their kin who remained on the surface and continued a direct line to Neanderthals and modern humans, this offshoot lineage would have begun a dramatically different evolutionary path. In their isolated habitat, perhaps within a stable high-altitude cave network or geothermal tunnel system, these hominins adapted to conditions where long-term planning, cooperation, and environmental sensitivity were more useful than aggression or short-term competition. The pressure to outfight rivals was replaced with the challenge of surviving in silence, darkness, and spatial limitation. This led to the selection of different traits: enhanced biological radar, subtle communication, and advanced social cohesion. By around 400,000 years ago, this population had begun to display distinct cognitive and cultural development. Whereas other hominins were developing increasingly sophisticated tools for hunting and warfare, this group may have started developing abstract thought, spiritual frameworks, and a deeper relationship with their environment. The use of minerals, acoustic harmonics, and subterranean resonance could have emerged as part of both their technological and spiritual lives. Their civilization would not have grown outward, sprawling over territory, but inward, developing compact and highly advanced habitats. They may have bypassed many of the material stages Homo sapiens would later pass through, skipping large-scale agriculture or metallurgy and instead pursuing precision technologies rooted in earth energy, pressure systems, and crystalline structures. Their form of advancement was likely invisible to the surface world, not because it lacked sophistication, but because it took a form unrecognizable to surface-bound civilizations. By 100,000 BCE, as Homo sapiens emerged and spread across the continents, these beings had already mastered concealment. They would have learned to avoid direct contact, having watched surface hominins cycle through conflict, dominance, and collapse. Instead of revealing themselves, they may have left only subtle traces, strange figures etched in ancient cave art, shared symbols found across cultures, and inexplicable knowledge that surfaced in myth and shamanic tradition. Their influence may have been indirect, passed through visions, dreams, or encoded rituals. Through the millennia, their technological and cultural evolution likely continued on a stable arc, unbroken by war, resource scarcity, or extinction threats. The need for overt technology, visible monuments, weapons, or transportation infrastructure would have been minimized. What they developed instead may have been internally integrated, craft powered by frequency manipulation, cloaking through resonance, and biologically adaptive machinery. To the surface eye, this appears miraculous or alien, but it may simply reflect a path of technological evolution optimized for underground existence and energetic harmony rather than open domination. By the time modern humans began writing history, this civilization had already retreated fully into obscurity. Their occasional presence, perhaps misinterpreted as gods, spirits, or extraterrestrials, was fleeting and precise. The modern phenomenon of UAP may be one of the few visible remnants of their continued surveillance or observation, a quiet echo of a lineage that chose silence over spectacle, patience over conquest, and longevity over visibility. Possibility number 3, latest possible divergence. Around 300,000 years ago, a period overlapping with the early emergence of Homo sapiens, a small-brained hominin known as Homo naledi was quietly exhibiting behaviors that defied conventional expectations. Though possessing a cranial capacity closer to that of Australopithecines than modern humans, Naledi was found deep within the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, in chambers accessible only through narrow, treacherous passages. There, compelling evidence has emerged suggesting that this species was intentionally placing their dead, and potentially conducting burial rituals, in near total darkness. The implications are enormous, but this is not behavior attributed to mere accident or natural entrapment. The Naledi were navigating deep cave systems repeatedly, deliberately, and, as new research suggests, possibly with fire. Blackened ceilings and burnt material hint at torch use, while engraved symbols on nearby cave walls suggest a rudimentary form of symbolic communication or proto-writing. This puts Homo naledi in the company of behaviors long assumed to be the sole domain of later Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. Such a pattern of subterranean engagement, not as refuge, but as a persistent, chosen environment, hints at an evolutionary potential rarely considered. While most hominin species competed above ground for territory and resources, it's plausible that a small offshoot population of Homo naledi adapted to full-time subterranean life. Rather than evolving toward domination of the surface, this lineage may have pursued survival through seclusion. Unlike their relatives who perished, this branch could have developed in darkness, gradually acquiring cognitive refinements tailored to their domain. Evolution within the cave environment would have prioritized different traits: sensory enhancements, spatial memory, tactile communication, and complex social bonding in confined settings. Their relationship with fire, not just as warmth but as light in the absence of the sun, could have seeded an early form of environmental manipulation. Over thousands of generations, their physical form may have changed: lighter skeletal structures, enlarged eyes or sensory organs, pallid skin, and a compact frame optimized for heat retention and spatial mobility. Symbol use, ritual, and fire suggest that this population was already capable of abstract thought and cultural transmission. Without the interruptions of warfare or environmental catastrophe faced by surface populations, their development could have continued in a stable, linear fashion. Over 300,000 years, even modest incremental advances could have yielded a sophisticated technological culture, potentially focused more on resonance, biointegration, or energy conservation than industrial machinery. This would explain their apparent invisibility. A culture evolved entirely underground from its infancy might never have developed the surface-dependent technologies we associate with advancement. Their materials, power sources, and architecture might leave no surface traces, or appear as natural formations. Their mythic echoes, as hidden people, underground gods, or the others in folklore, may reflect sporadic contact across ancient eras. In this model, modern UAP phenomena may represent an extension of their technology adapted for temporary surface exposure or off-world excursions, not interstellar craft. It could also explain their seemingly biological interface with craft, a trait reported in many close encounter testimonies, as their technology may have developed as an extension of their own physiology, rather than as a separate mechanical infrastructure. In this scenario, Homo naledi didn't go extinct, it retreated, not in failure, but in strategy. And from its subterranean strongholds, it may have continued to observe, evolve, and survive long past the age of the Neanderthals and even into the modern human epoch, hidden but never gone. Multiple hominin species divergence. Now let's explore the possibility of multiple species branching off and evolving independently underground. We could call it the multi-lineage cryptoterrestrial evolutionary model, independent divergences of subterranean hominins across time and region. The same could be said for multiple dinosaur species as well, but here the focus will be hominin lineage. Rather than a single species branching from the human evolutionary tree and developing in secret, let's explore an additional possibility: that multiple hominin species independently pursued subterranean adaptation in different parts of the world. Each would have evolved under localized environmental pressures, contributing to the diversity of morphological and behavioral traits now loosely categorized in modern literature as greys, insectoids, reptilians, or others. These divergent subterranean lineages could account not only for the wide variance in UAP-associated craft design, but also for subtle differences in NHI appearance reported across cultures and modern encounters. Let's start with ancient divergence, around 2 million years ago, and pan-Earth origins, possibly arising in Asia or East Africa. This lineage likely branched from Homo habilis or early Homo erectus, perhaps within the Rift Valley or parts of Southeast Asia. Early migration into volcanic caves or geothermal networks may have shielded this population from environmental upheaval. Over nearly 2 million years, they would have evolved advanced subterranean infrastructure and possibly extended their influence off-world. A portion of this population may have constructed or inhabited structures on the moon, some of which have been noted in anomalous Apollo-era photographs. Given the immense time span, they may have undergone further evolution in low-gravity environments, resulting in taller, more gracile forms, potentially accounting for mantis-like grays described in various abduction cases. Their physiology, elongated limbs, sensitive eyes, and fluid motion would be consistent with adaptation to lunar or microgravity conditions. This group would likely exhibit the most advanced technology of all hominin cryptoterrestrial types, potentially blending biological systems with gravity modulation and near invisibility. Encounters with these beings are often the most psychologically disturbing, suggesting a deeper divergence not just physically but cognitively and communicatively. For the mid-range divergence, around 800,000 years ago, let's assume Eurasian origins. This lineage may have branched from Homo heidelbergensis or Homo antecessor, somewhere in the Eurasian highlands, perhaps in regions now corresponding to the Caucasus, Himalayas, or deep Central Asian cave systems. These beings may have entered the subterranean realm to escape glacial encroachment, predator pressures, or interspecies competition. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this group developed in relative peace, optimizing their environment not for dominance, but for stability and sensory enhancement. Their evolution may have favored telepathic communication, tonal resonance, and emotional sensitivity. Modern descriptions of classic grays, small-bodied, smooth-skinned with large black eyes and subdued behavior, may align with this lineage. Subtle physical and behavioral differences among these grays, such as height variation, eye shape, or skin tone, could reflect regional divergence even within this underground population, mirroring the way Homo sapiens show phenotypic variation by region. For recent diversion, around 300,000 years ago, let's stay with a species of southern African origin. Of course, multiple lineages indigenous to Europe or North and South America are also possible, but a lengthier episode would be required to contemplate further. In this scenario, a limited population of Homo naledi, known to have intentionally deposited their dead in deep, complex cave systems, pursued full adaptation to subterranean life. Based on evidence of fire use and symbolic markings, they were already engaged in culturally complex behavior in darkness long before modern humans. While the majority of naledi may have died out, this particular group, faced with rising competition from Homo sapiens, may have survived by disappearing deeper underground. Evolution in this environment would have reinforced traits like spatial memory, fine motor skills, sensory acuity, and ritual behavior. Over 300,000 years, they could have developed a biologically adapted, efficient form of intelligence distinct from humans, relying on cooperation, environmental harmony, and concealment. Reports of shorter brown-skinned grays, such as the Varginha Brazil encounter, may reflect this lineage, beings that are less technologically extravagant since they were one of the later species to evolve. Their distinct traits, brown or reddish skin, ridged or horned skulls, and red or glowing eyes, may reflect adaptations for communication and defense within complete darkness, possibly including bioluminescent signaling or cranial sensory protrusions. Of course, such features may align more closely with an ancient dinosaur species that evolved to intelligence rather than a hominin one. This multilineage cryptoterrestrial evolutionary model also provides a robust framework for interpreting cultural variation in mythological beings. For instance, Nordic gods, jinn, and sky people in northern and central Asia could reflect the mid-range Eurasian branch. Ant people of the Hopi, underworld lords of Mesoamerican cosmology, or Nagas of Indian mythology, may relate to interactions with offshoots of the earliest lineage. The more recent divergence of cryptoterrestrials described in some African, South American, and Southeast Asian lore could trace to the Homo naledi variant. Of course, all of these models are nothing more than thought experiments for the purpose of explaining what people might be witnessing throughout history. This multi-origin framework merely offers a coherent explanation for the variety in physical descriptions of NHIs and UAP occupants, localized mythological accounts that mirror modern UAP reports, differences in reported craft behavior and aesthetic reflecting technological divergence, the presence of apparent bases or artificial structures on the moon or under the oceans, and finally, evolution of different psychocognitive traits, explaining variations in reported telepathy, emotional effect, or movement style. There's also room for the Silurian hypothesis within this broader multilineage cryptoterrestrial model. If some version of it is true, alongside divergent hominin lines, then those Silurian beings would likely be far more advanced than any hominin-descended species. In fact, they might be the ones in charge. Or perhaps all of these groups are descendants of different dinosaur species rather than hominins. It's plausible that multiple dinosaur species could have independently gone underground in various parts of the world, each adapting to their specific environment. Over millions of years, this could result in a range of slightly different intelligent species with significant variation in appearance and behavior. Rather than viewing the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis as a single hidden lineage, this final model proposes something more elaborate, a complex, multi-branched subterranean ecosystem of intelligent, Earth-originating species, each shaped by their divergence point and underground habitat. What we perceive as modern UAP phenomena could be the result of coordination, rivalry, or even a long-standing underground alliance or federation, completely invisible to surface civilization, yet far older and more deeply rooted than we imagine. If any secret government agency is aware of this reality, it may be because they are part of a fragile alliance, one in which they've been instructed, or even warned, to keep the existence of these NHIs secret. Spreading disinformation about their true origins and locations might not be a choice, but a condition of the arrangement, enforced by the cryptoterrestrial factions themselves. Ultimately, the question of which hypothetical timeline is accurate may not matter. These scenarios are thought experiments, frameworks meant to explore how the UAP phenomenon could be explained if it's ever revealed to involve non-human intelligences. If even one such civilization arose here on Earth and moved underground, then the broader picture begins to come into focus. And I hate to keep using this example, but the Nazca mummies remain the only known piece of potential evidence that could substantiate the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, even more so than ancient structures on the moon. After all, an extraterrestrial race could have built those structures, but DNA from a confirmed non-human intelligence, one that originated here, would erase all doubt about where this intelligence truly came from. The telepathy connection. Before concluding the episode, I feel compelled to briefly touch on one final aspect often reported in NHI encounters, and that is mental telepathy. While this ability could apply to any type of non-human intelligence, regardless of its origin, an interesting idea emerges when we consider alternative forms of communication that might evolve in a subterranean environment. Admittedly, this introduces another unknown into the discussion, but the potential link between telepathy and the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis makes it worth exploring. If a species evolved underground, where sound might be unreliable or limited, and visual cues like body language would be ineffective, then nonverbal, possibly mind-to-mind communication could have emerged as a natural solution. In this context, telepathy wouldn't require a metaphysical explanation. It could simply be a biological adaptation, something entirely natural, even if science has no way of fully explaining it yet. If we apply the framework surrounding telepathy and psi phenomena to a hypothetical cryptoterrestrial species that branched off from a dinosaur or hominin line and evolved underground, we find a number of compelling evolutionary pressures that could favor the development or retention of telepathic-like abilities. In such a subterranean environment, specific adaptations would be shaped not just by physical constraints, but also by the demands of communication, survival, and coordination in dark, confined, and acoustically challenging spaces. One of the most obvious environmental factors would be low light or total darkness. In such an environment, visual communication, facial expressions, gestures, and body language would become ineffective. This limitation would create strong pressure to rely on non-visual forms of communication, such as auditory, tactile, or even psi-like methods. A species in this setting might retain or evolve pre-linguistic or non-local cognitive abilities, like telepathic bonding or intuitive thought sharing. Sensitivity to emotional or mental states in others could become highly refined, potentially through subtle electromagnetic biofields or morphic resonance, if such phenomena exist. Additionally, the acoustic nature of cave systems poses its own problems. Echoes and distorted sounds would make long-range vocal communication unreliable or even hazardous, potentially attracting predators or rival groups. Over time, this could lead to an evolutionary preference for silence as a survival trait, making telepathic or empathic communication a far more practical and stealthy alternative. Furthermore, subterranean species would likely live in small, stable, and tightly bonded social groups, increasing the value of mental synchronization and collective awareness. Effective coordination in complete darkness, whether for movement, hunting, or decision-making, would benefit from deep, silent understanding between group members. This could lead to neurological specializations that favor shared cognition, possibly through natural biofields or speculative non-local consciousness channels. In this environment, group cohesion could be strengthened through emotional harmonization and intuitive understanding rather than speech. The navigation of hazardous terrain would also place unique demands on such a species. Moving through dangerous tunnels or sensing unstable geology without sight would favor individuals with heightened spatial awareness and perhaps extrasensory mapping capabilities, similar in function to bat echolocation or electroreception in certain fish. Some evolutionary models suggest this could involve a non-retinal form of perception, such as internal mental modeling of space or remote sensing, which to us might appear indistinguishable from telepathy. If early hominins possessed rudimentary psi or empathic faculties, as some shamanic traditions and parapsychological research suggests, these underground hominins, or Silurians, may have retained or even amplified such abilities due to continuous use. Unlike Homo sapiens, who gradually suppressed such faculties with the rise of language, literacy, and analytical reasoning, cryptoterrestrials could have taken the opposite evolutionary path, developing neurological systems more adept at direct mental interfacing. They may have evolved increased sensitivity to endogenous brain fields, specialized regions for interpreting others' thoughts, and higher inner brain synchrony. In terms of neurological adaptations, this hypothetical species might have enlarged temporal lobes for enhanced tuitive and empathic processing, and reduce emphasis on Broca's and Wernicke's areas, since spoken language would be less relevant. Their neurons might be highly myelinated for rapid interregional communication, and brain structures like the pineal gland or thalamus could play a more prominent role, potentially facilitating unity experiences or shared mental states. They might even have developed tissues sensitive to electromagnetic fluctuations, functioning similarly to the magnetoreception found in birds and marine animals. Culturally, such beings would have no need for symbolic writing or spoken language. Instead, memory and experience might be shared directly through collective cognition, akin to a psychic group memory. Outsiders encountering this species might misinterpret their form of interaction as telepathy, apparitions, or sudden downloads of emotion or knowledge, phenomena that frequently appear in accounts of paranormal or mystical experiences. This concept finds echoes in global folklore. Legends of fairies, jinn, little people, or underground beings often describe them as silent yet communicative, mentally invasive, or capable of inducing visions and dreams. Similarly, remote viewers and shamans sometimes describe their contact with hidden telepathic intelligences. In our own species, certain individuals with autism or savant syndrome have been described as sharing deep nonverbal communication with caregivers, possibly modern hints of a latent capacity long forgotten. In this light, telepathy would not be a magical anomaly, but a biologically plausible solution to the specific demands of subterranean life. Darkness, silence, social cohesion, and spatial danger all create conditions where non-local communication becomes adaptive, perhaps even necessary. What we perceive as supernatural may simply be the natural outcome of an evolutionary path diverging from our own, one optimized for secrecy, resilience, and mental interconnectedness, a form of intelligence shaped not by the open skies, but by the unseen world below. In conclusion, if there truly is a non-human intelligence presence on Earth, and if humanity is somehow destined to evolve into something resembling the typical gray archetype, then perhaps the grays are living proof of a hominin cryptoterrestrial species, one that branched off from the Homo genus and went underground hundreds of thousands of years ago. This would explain their striking resemblance to Homo sapiens. The only real alternative would be that the grays are actually us from the future, but that possibility will be explored more deeply in the next episode. If we can eliminate time travel from the equation, we remove a major unknown, and in doing so, we could reasonably conclude that they are from the past, not the future. On the other hand, if an NHI body is ever discovered and DNA analysis reveals no match to any known Earth species, then the only remaining explanations are extraterrestrial or interdimensional origins. However, if the DNA shows a connection to a dinosaur species, such as Steninocosaurus, it would still point to an earthly origin, and since we'd still likely share a significant portion of DNA, it would strongly support the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. But to confirm any of this, we would need an actual body to test. The Nazca mummies represent one such potential piece of evidence. If fully and independently tested through carbon dating, X-ray imaging, and comprehensive DNA sequencing by experts in their respective fields, we may finally get closer to an answer. If the mummies are determined to be modern fabrications, the case can be closed. If they're found to be ancient recreations, perhaps from around 1,000 years ago, we might logically assume that whoever made them was modeling them after something they had seen, and possibly revered. Even then, their true origin would remain speculative, but the implication of a historical NHI presence would be difficult to ignore. If, however, the results show DNA consistent with a hominin or dinosaurian lineage, yet clearly non-human, the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis would take center stage. In the meantime, we should keep an open mind and consider all origin possibilities without rigidly adhering to any single narrative. I presented a variety of philosophical and deductive methods in previous episodes to help analyze these different hypotheses and weigh the evidence. Once the origin likelihood chart is completed and released at the end of this mini-series, you'll have all the tools needed to explore these questions further, except perhaps for a Bayesian model, which will be introduced in Season 2. Thanks again for listening or watching this episode. I hope you'll join me next time as we dive into the extraterrestrial model, which is part 2 of the Origins mini-series. Take care, everyone.